It was November of last year, 10 months ago, that you and I had quite a surprise from Kia. We were tasked with driving the love child of Peter and Albert. Didn't expect it to be really that good. It exceeded expectations in most every way, even to the point where the ones I see on the road are more of this fancy model, the V6, not the four-cylinder. As good as that was, you and I knew we had to get back to the bread and butter of Kia, which is not this. But here's the thing, Kia today is different than it was a year ago because now there's a halo car. So Peter and Albert are now trying to take the DNA of this and shoehorn it into something called the 2019 Kia Forte. If you've seen any of our Hyundai Elantra episodes, some of these numbers are indeed going to be familiar to you. That said, we do need to get some important business out of the way right at the top. There is no current derivation of the Kia Forte with a turbocharger on offer, not even that wonderful 1.6 turbo engine that we've seen in the sportier derivations of the Elantra. Here it's the Atkinson Cycle 2-liter, 4-cylinder direct injected gasoline engine. 147 horsepower, comes in at 6,500 RPM, 132 pounds of torque, comes in at a mildly aggressive 4,500 RPM. What does that translate to around town? One needs to work the engine more to get usable torque in traffic. Then that drives the front wheels through one of two transmission options. The good news is there is a manual transmission on offer. The bad news is it's only on offer in the most basic model, one with the drum brakes in the back. Then there isn't an automatic transmission, at least one with gears. The only automatic transmission offer is a CVT. We're going to spend more time in this episode talking about this. But now, let's try the engine. So, welcome to Steel Country. Doesn't exactly look like it, but Pittsburgh is there, and we're somewhere on the Pennsylvania-Ohio border. I'd love to say we're going to do some scenery here, but not really. I'd love to say we're going to do some eating in Pittsburgh, because if you've ever been to Pittsburgh, especially Primanti's, you know how wonderful it is. But really our job is to understand that engine, and we've used it before in the Elantra. Works really well there, but in that case, it's got gears strapped to it. Here, not so much. So let's understand the impact of that change. Come to a stop, and let's put our foot into it. 147 horsepower. A lot of pageantry, a lot of noise going on there. That's the CVT. That is making that happen, making the engine work harder than it would in an Elantra. It picks up and goes. We've used it on some steep hills throughout the day-to-day, and I will say it smacks you in the face of a trade-off. Clearly the folks at Kia were like, we got to make a decision here. Do we want to go with fuel economy or do we want to go with power? And I would argue they really went far over into the fuel economy side. To the point where the engine has to work harder in this application than in the Elantra. Is it slow or underpowered? No, and we found that out in the Elantra. It wasn't the case there. Here it just has to work harder. I would argue past that 4,500 peak torque engine speed to get this thing to move. So really it's about expectations. You're getting into a Forte over an Elantra because of fuel economy, and I would argue design, more so than brute force. You and I need to do a mini tech review of sorts, go over some of the important facts and figures that contribute to the reason for being for the 2019 Kia Forte. Let's start with the wheelbase, 106.3. Suspension is made up of McPherson struts in the front, torsion beam in the back. Not particularly excited about that piece. Wheels, 3 on offer, 15, 16, 17. We are driving the one with the 17s. Then there's the coefficient of drag. This is somewhat unexpected, 0.269. Basis of comparison, that's more sports car territory than C segment territory. Then there's the elephant in the room. It's a Hyundai Kia product. And one of you complained in the Hyundai Santa Fe episode of me referring to them as a steel company masquerading as a car company. Well, for the remedial class, the reason why that is beneficial is this is, not this one here, but the car we're driving today is a $25,000 car. Now that's the fanciest one on offer, but the most basic one is $17,000. Whether one chooses 17 or 25, it still has 54% of the total structure is made of high-strength steel. Why is that important? It's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, high-strength steel is obviously stronger, which means it drives better because the structure is better going over broken pavement, train tracks, around town, that kind of stuff. Then, even though it's stronger, the structure is lighter, and then that contributes, along with the CVT, to better fuel economy. While we're on the topic of fuel economy, what is it? Because that's the reason for being. Well, we talked about that manual transmission and the CVT. So let's compare those two. Around town, the manual is 27, pretty good. But then you get into the CVT, it's 31. Out on the highway, it's 37, really good. But then again, the CVT is 41. Combined, 31 versus 35. So yes, do I like CVTs? No. But I can't really argue with some of the numbers for the intended customer of a Kia Forte. So this is the point of the episode where you and I would normally discuss driving dynamics. But I feel we don't need to spend a lot of time on that today, mainly because of the mission of a compact car like a Kia Forte. It's more around town than on roads like this. However, compact car aside, there are two things that smack you in the face the minute you get behind the wheel of this thing. The first, and I would argue the biggest change, and I would argue over the Elantra, is the steering. Let's put our foot into this thing, come around this turn here, and even in a basic mode, there's a weightiness to the steering that kind of shocking for a compact car. Like that G8 we just passed, the steering is closer to that G8 than, say, the Elantra this thing is related to. And then, number two, and that would be ride comfort. You and I spent a lot of time in other episodes talking about dimensions, construction methods, and materials. Here we need to spend more time talking about dimensions, specifically the wheelbase. In this case, 106.3. Now, why is that important? Well, look at it from a comparison point of view. Like a Rogue, that's a compact crossover. You would think it's bigger than this. The wheelbase there is 106.5, something like that. So it's really close. And you look at this, and this is a sedan, and you think it's smaller. Well, it's not just how it works back here, but ride quality. And it's more important here than sitting over there. And this is why. There's a torsion beam back there we talked about. And usually when you're driving on roads like this and you're sitting in a car that has a torsion beam, you get kind of nauseous because you're moving all around. There isn't as much composure. But here, the second thing that smacks you across the face is ride composure, not just the steering. And I would argue there's been some tuning back there in that torsion beam where they probably didn't know that the VW was going to do the same thing. But here it has that same quality, where to the point where you and I talk about that spectrum of driving dynamics for Hyundais and Kias, and how they used to be like down here and they're moving their way up, especially when you have the Elantra Sport that has the independent suspension, it's up here. This, not quite there, but it's here. Now while we're back here, let's talk about the actual use case of where you sit. Now, this is where I would sit as a 6-footer, and actually I kind of had to exaggerate this because I would put the seat back further forward and it would look like I'm almost sandbagging the deal. Well, so this one I put it farther back, and there's still plenty of knee room here. Other than that, a pleasant place to be, but I do have some bad news for Gilles and Manello. There are no USB ports back here, no power plugs, no nothing. There's 2 up there, but nothing back here. Something tells me she's going to get very angry about that. You guys don't get to see the presentations that we have to sit through on these launch events. Some are very good and informative and quick, and others are very long, boring, and not so good. This one was interesting in that they spent a lot of time focusing on the DNA of the Stinger has made its way down to the Kia Forte. And usually I never agree with marketing mumbo jumbo like that, but here, they're right. Like, you look at the way the screen is designed here, some of the switchgear, even the fit and finish has made its way down, at least some of it, to the Kia Forte. This one is, what, a GT2 with everything in it, so it's got the heated and cooled seats. And believe it or not, the $25,000 car we're driving, less than half the price of this one, has heated and cooled seats. Then some of the tech has cascaded down to the Kia Forte. Like, this has got the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so does the Kia Forte. So overall, bravo Kia. The marketing matches up with the product. Hello, Scotty.
Hello, MotoMan.
You guys do not know the lovely and gracious Scotty, but you've seen her work before because she was the stunt driver in the X4 episode down in South Carolina. I brought Scotty on because A, she's an amazing author. This is the author behind the Stu Leonard book I put on the MotoManTV book club. That was an amazing story you told.
Thank you.
I would argue it wasn't just about a business, it was about really a life story.
His story is about overcoming challenges and creating value with nothing.
Wait a minute, less than nothing. Literally, the state of Connecticut threw his ass on the street, and that's where his success came from.
Yes.
Okay, I don't want to give it away. I brought you on for a very specific reason. Would you agree that I am not practical?
You are not a practical man, MotoMan.
I think you would also agree I'm not a fan of the CVT.
I hear that about you.
Yeah, she's had to listen to me complain all day about CVTs.
Yes.
And the reality is, I get it. I get the fuel economy, it's better fuel economy, and I get for the manufacturer, it's much cheaper to produce because less parts. However, you are here because I want someone who is more practical and talks to a practical audience. What do you think of this?
I like them. For families with budgets and people who drive a lot, like me, 30,000 miles a year.
Oh,
that's
tell me what you drive.
I drive a BMW 335i.
And what transmission?
6-speed manual.
How cool is Scotty?
How cool is that?
So you should tell everybody our difference in fuel economy. What was my MPG when I was driving?
Oh my gosh! So he was getting 22 miles to the gallon. I'm getting 32. That's why I like CVTs.
You talk to a unique audience, different than mine, I would argue.
Yes.
What's your site?
My site is A Girl's Guide to Cars.
And who do you talk to?
And, well, we talk to women. We present cars on women's terms. So my reader is in market for a new car, and generally she's in market for anywhere up to 4 cars at any given time. She buys a lot of cars.
Are they like the go-to person in their group of friends?
Not necessarily. Usually she's the person deciding on the budget, and she's the decision maker. She's the researcher. So she's buying her car or the family car. She's buying her spouse's car, helping her spouse make that car decision. Mm-hmm. She may be buying a car for a teenager or a college kid. She may be helping her recent grad buy a car. She
so
might be
what kind of an
that
impact would this kind of transmission have on them, if at all?
She doesn't care. What she wants, what my reader wants, is confidence. And she wants to know that the car has enough power to accelerate onto the highway safely, that her teen driver is going to be able to accelerate on the highway safely in a car like this.
So it's not about economy. It's not about the highest fuel economy or the most efficient packaging.
That is on the list. I would say fuel economy, if you made a list of the 10 things that are most important to her, fuel economy is always going to be in that top 10.
See, my audience, if they were to put fuel economy in like their list of top 10 considerations, it would be like 15. The purpose of this episode was to move away, at least temporarily, from the now halo of Kia to the bread and butter of Kia. But really, what is the bread and butter of any car manufacturer? To me, that's volume sales. You look at Kia in the US last year, there were about 500,000 units. In Europe, they were about the same, 500,000 units. Take this GT2 all-wheel drive Stinger, didn't even register as a percent against those numbers. But you take the Forte, it was over 25% of those numbers. So translated, that means the new Forte has to be really good. And I would argue in many areas it is. They knocked it out of the park with the steering. The build quality is unusually good. The outside, they took some of the design cues of this and wrapped it in the proportions of a C-segment car, and it's not goofy like going from an S-Class to a C-Class. And then there's some fancy features in there. It is indeed, they knocked it out of the park in so many areas, and is a good car. I have a problem with that CVT, and here's why. They could have accomplished the same goal of the fuel efficiency with 7, 8, 9 speeds, and taken this car from being what I would argue is middle to upper middle of this C-segment sedan pack to top of the pack. That's really how much it weighs on my brain. The kind of people who are going to buy this car probably won't even think twice about it. But to me, it's the difference between really good and great. So I'm going to turn this around to you guys and stop talking about CVTs, and I'm going to ask you a very direct question here. Would you buy the new Forte, whether it's $17,000 or $25,000, so fancy or the cheap seats, or would you buy a used car? And if so, what used car would you buy? How much would you spend, and what region of the world do you hail from? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I think Kumo and I are going to get back into the halo of Kia and do a couple of launch control starts here at the airport before we have to turn this back in. So I'll see you next time. Bis später.